The Rough Drafts podcast is sponsored by Unicorn.com, the world's premier esports betting site. Bet on your favorite games like CSGO, Dota 2, and League of Legends, and earn Unicoins through successful bets, or use Unicorn's exclusive Connect program, where you can earn Unicoins just by playing some of your favorite games. Use your earnings to enter Unicorn's raffles for exciting prizes like Logitech peripherals or CSGO skins. So join Chase and Walter and prove who really is the esports gambling expert. Unicorn.com. Log on today. Hello, Internet. This is Walter, Ceades, Fedczuk, bringing you a very, very special of the Rough Drafts podcast. If you guys have been paying attention to the channel, the last 2 weeks we've been doing our spring split team-by-team preview episodes, and one of the owners of one of those rosters apparently listened to one of these episodes.
Where?
And, right, someone listened to one of these episodes and reached out to us and said, hey, I like the episode, but I think some of the things with your analysis are slightly skewy. I'd love to come on the podcast sometime. So joining us from beautiful Rochester, New York, my hometown.
Skyline back there.
And New York City. He's in both places at once. The owner of Splyce, LazerChicken. Marty, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
It's pronounced LazerChicken, so you got
it. It's LazerChicken. Perfect. And as always,
I like to always quantify it as co-owner. I wish I could
co-owner.
claim that I did all this myself, but I certainly didn't, and I have awesome co-founders that worked with me. So
awesome. Co-owner of Splyce, Marty LazerChicken, and as always, my good friend and podcast co-host, Chase, RedShirtKing Wassenar. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. We get to talk to an LCS owner, and I get to pick the brain for a while because, I've been a coach when I was over in Turkey. That's a very different experience, and in Turkey was very different from being in the major leagues of Europe. So I've wanted to pick your brain for a while now. I think this is going to be I'm very excited to talk to you today, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, look, guys, I appreciate you having me. You may think it's like I same in reverse, right? Like I don't think most times people give a shit about my opinion, even though I have a bunch of esports teams. Doesn't mean people actually care, especially people analyzing out there because they have their own opinions, right? So I appreciate that you actually care that I have something to say about some of your thoughts, and I think that there's a lot of interesting analysis out there right now because we're T-minus 5 days, 6 days, I can't count right now from the start of LCS, so everyone's got an opinion, right?
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. So, man, you do own multiple teams. I went on your website just because I wanted to refresh everything. You guys originally started as Follow Esports.
Yeah, a long time ago.
You were like the TV guide of esports. It was really helpful when you guys were like that. And I think you had a couple Smash players then, and
our first team was Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike, yeah.
And it's because we honestly followed the Kingwin model. Mm-hmm. We were talking to a buddy of mine, and he said, you should get a team. And we said, what? He said, yeah, instead of sponsoring, we'll just get a team and call it Follow Esports. And we talked about it, and we said, well, it kind of makes sense. In fact, maybe we could even get other sponsors who aren't competitors and put those on the jersey too. Mm-hmm. And so we picked up what was called SKDC back then, SapphireKelowna.com for any hardcore Counter-Strike fans. It was really interesting because being a guy who came from theater and talent management, I was like, oh wait, I like this way better than running a tech company. I'm pretty good at it too. I did it in theater, film, and television for a decade. And the rest is history, as they say, right? So
yeah, you guys have branched out. You have the League of Legends team, obviously, which is where we're gonna probably spend most of our time talking this episode. But you have a Call of Duty team that placed second at the Call of Duty World Championship. I saw you get into a little bit of a beef with some people on Twitter with Scott Gandhi the other day. Yeah. You still have a CSGO team. You have a couple Smash players. You have the World of Warcraft World Champions.
Yeah. I don't know if you can't tell by being called LazerChicken, that's my original game. So like that was a pretty intense moment for me. I was in the crowd. I was like, there may be in a tier or two. I'm not going to admit that there may have been. So
I always forget World of Warcraft has an esports scene, and then BlizzCon happens, and there's a stream for it, and I'm like, oh,
well,
there we go.
For me, like I was one of those guys who back before esports was so we'll call it mainstream now, right? Like it's all over Twitch. I don't mean mainstream as in the whole general audience, but around gaming it's mainstream, right? Back when like I played a ton of Warcraft, and someone would be like, hey, I'm putting together this little tournament, do you want to help out? And like we'd help out and volunteer. And then also it was cool to see these guys who just were sick on the server now playing on a stream. There wasn't even much money involved, right? And that's how I kind of got into esports. So it still like brings me back to, I don't know, 5-6 years or whatever to doing that. That's why I pay more attention to it than most, I guess you'd say, right?
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And then just finishing off your roster, Hearthstone player, Overwatch, Gears of War, and 2 of the better StarCraft players that were on the market.
2 of the best, I think you meant to say, not 2 of the better.
That's Chase's realm. I'm not a huge StarCraft guy, so you guys nerd out about StarCraft for a moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about our StarCraft guys.
Yeah, I feel like you got away with murder on some of those sightings. That was the fact that they were available is just, someone has to fill in the gap in Korea, right? I like that teams like you are the ones that are looking to do it.
My favorite moment of the last few months, honestly, was when we reached out to Solar, because we not only Solar an incredible player. I mean, he won SSL in the summer. He's won DreamHack. But he also has his personality, which you don't always get from Korean players because they don't necessarily speak English very well, and he does. That is dynamic. If you saw him like on Take TV, for example, during Home Story Cup, like he's funny and he's fun, and his stream is great, and people love his stream. He just started it, So we reached out to him, but the reason I mention it is he goes, Splyce, oh my God, I love your League of Legends team. He starts talking about how he watches and stuff, and we're like, you know who we are? Moment for us, to be like a Korean StarCraft, basically a guy who's probably gonna be a legend by the end of his career, was like saying how much he liked our League of Legends team, and that was awesome. So
that's actually pretty incredible, and that kind of brings me to one of these first points that I want to bring up. We've gone through and basically listed all the games that you're in, and it's quite a variety. And when you look at where the players are from, Splyce is pretty truly a global organization. You're a North American-based company, like I said, based out of upstate New York, that has a European League of Legends team, and a UK Call of Duty team, and a Mexican Gears of War team, and 2 Korean StarCraft players, and even all your other teams are a mix of US-based and mainly European-based.
Yep.
So why do that? Why not just be a North American organization and just focus primarily on North American esports?
So there's 2 reasons for this. Number one, if you owned let's say a soccer team, right, and you wanted to go gain more fans for your soccer team, you don't get to go out and say, I'm going to find people who don't know soccer, right? There's probably a pretty good chance you're not going to find them. You're pretty much stuck with what I call 5-year-olds. I mean, they turn 5 and they start to discover the world of sports, and they're figuring out what games they like, right? Okay. That's all you get open to. Esports is in this amazing place right now where a large majority of the world are 5-year-olds. They're just finding esports for the first time. And so anytime it can be Splyce that's the first brand or the brand they attach themselves to, I'm a happy man, right? Like I want them to go, that's my favorite team. I mentioned when we were talking pre-show that I'm a huge Spurs fan. I love the San Antonio Spurs. I've been a fan for like almost 30 years now. Mm-hmm. That's not going to change, right? Like my love wasn't fly by night. I'm not like, oh, another player's gone. And that happens. Some people are like around a certain player, they're like a team, like Jordan the Bulls, let's say, right? Where people are on that. And so that's a fan affinity with a brand. And I want to build that now. Also because I love generational fans, where that fan teaches their kids to love our brand, and so that extends to like, why not just North America? Because that's a very small population of people in the world, and it's a truly global game. I mean, by game I mean all the games, right? As opposed to NBA or NHL or NFL, where they tend to be more centralized in North America. Mm-hmm. But even look at NBA and how much they've done outreach out in the other areas and how much they're influencing their global presence. They wish they could have the reach we do in esports. I promise you,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, it's true because we access fans. I mean, I'll be talking to a Danish fan and a Mexican fan and a Korean fan, all Splyce fans. how often do you think the Bulls get to do that, right? Engage with fans so globally like that, and then have them engage each other, and that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, and not only that, but they can engage with themselves on the click of a button on social media and everything else. I mean, honestly, all the reasons you described are why I got into esports in the first place, because I was a huge fan of traditional sports. I'd been a diehard Falcons fan for about 14 years of my life, for better and for worse. And I get to the UK, and I can't watch my traditional sports anymore. They're on at weird hours. They don't air all the games that I watch. So I got into esports because it is so global, because no matter where you are, the VODs are there. You can follow your teams. And, we're huge proponents of becoming fans of a brand. And so I definitely connect with that message quite a bit. And there's another message that I think you guys have been able to handle very well, which is the message that you send out as far as gaining sponsorship. This is something we hear in Europe all the time. It's so much harder to get sponsors out there in Europe. It's so much harder to get, non-endemic sponsors when you go outside of North America. How have you guys been able to be so successful in that regard? Is it, just your history in the entertainment business, or what is it you think has allowed you to be successful with that?
So I say it's a few things. Number one is quality of brand has to be first. So one of my co-founders, Vinny, is an incredible designer. Everything you see, he designed. So he's been a designer for like 18 years now. He's worked with major brands, Victoria's Secret, Bed Bath & Beyond, like Neutrogena. We're not talking little brands. So he has that work ethic that says it's got to be incredible. So we have this really beautiful brand where everything from our website to our jerseys, everything is really well designed. Some people say we have the best merch in the business. I love hearing that because it makes me go, okay, so we've accomplished that, right? Mm-hmm. So that they want to be tied to that. And then secondly, winning matters, and we've done a fair amount of that this year, whether it's Call of Duty or in League of Legends, etc. And then thirdly, it's delivery. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot in esports, but not every esports team is great at actually delivering on what they say they're going to sponsors, whether it's super simple things like it's on the Twitch page, right? Or it's on their jersey, or very simple. That's not even work once it's done, right? Like it's there, it's done, forget about it. And so I think we execute really well. And the fourth and final thing is honestly just hard work. Myself and Grant, who works in our partnerships department, we just grind the grind, and I don't believe in 2017 started, so we're done for the year. 2017 started, so we will be grinding out sponsorships all year round, 365 days a year. And I've seen in the past some people get the idea that, the budget's locked for the year, and that's just simply not true. And so that's about the kind of more global answer to your question, but about more specifically different regions, we kind of look at what different sponsors are looking for. So our ViewSonic sponsorship actually started because of our European presence. They were looking to access more in Europe, and we actually deal most primarily with their European division, for example, versus someone like what's a good example? Exol Academy, which is our coaching platform. It wasn't necessarily regional, but we were looking at game-specific things, right? So we ended up focusing mostly on Overwatch with them because it's a new game. A lot of people are trying to learn it, so there's a lot of coaching opportunities. So right. I often don't walk into things going, hey Chase, look, I already know what you want. Here it is. Here's the package. It costs X dollars. Like, that's silly to me, and that's what people actually assumed a lot of times, that I don't do that. I say, well, Chase, what is it you want? And then let me figure out how I can deliver it to you, and then let's see what it costs, and let's see how I deliver it correctly. And then even when it's done, let's figure out if it worked or not. Like, some of our best sponsors have signed for multiple times because we finished the first time and they actually weren't happy. Not because we didn't deliver, but it just didn't accomplish what we all thought it would. So we said, okay, let's break it down and figure out why. And I have one sponsor right now. We just recently got our deal back together for the third time after a couple of 3-month contracts, and they're super stoked for this 1-year program. It looks nothing like the other two. And the reason is because we tested some things. Some things worked, some things didn't, so we kept the things that did, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's a formula like saying about regions. I don't think it's a formula by saying about if you were purely based in certain games or anything like that. We'll get there, right? Like, where it'll matter more that you're in certain games or you're in certain regions. Right now, a lot of the endemics are just looking for people that actually deliver, have super high quality, and can find the ways that are successful for them. That isn't just simply splatter my logo on your Twitter and tweet for me once a week, right? And we did that at the beginning, by the way. I'm not going to pretend like we did. We just, hey, here you go. Here's your tweet, and here's your logo, and it's not great, right? So
right.
Sorry, long-winded answer to your question.
No, very appreciated. I think that you're absolutely right, and that you need to find that connection with people. That's something we've had to do for the podcast, is just finding out what people are looking for and how we can tailor content. I mean, it's very important to be able to, take that feedback and turn it into something positive. Which I think you've done. Obviously, year one, you have to be happy with how that went out with this League of Legends team talking about success. That was,
yeah.
I mean,
I literally sat down with the guys when we were doing, re-signing, and I said, well, we certainly have nothing to talk about on the Rift, do we? Because I could say you exceeded all of my expectations in every aspect. So
interesting. So in your AMA, when you first purchased the Dignitas EU lineup, you did an AMA, you brought up a bunch of things, and this kind of tailoring off of expectations, you brought up SMART goals. And I'll put a link to the link that you put in that AMA so people who don't know what SMART goals are, take a quick look, understand them. So part of this is timing, part of this is making responsible and achievable goals. And like you said, you basically exceeded expectations on the Rift with your League of Legends team in year one. You even said in the interview, our goal isn't necessarily to get to Worlds right away. We want to build this up, and playoffs is really our first chance. And in Split 1, you went the opposite way, but then in Split 2, you hit the playoffs, you hit that mark.
Can I interrupt you to say that?
Of course.
It went the opposite way. So here's what I would say. This is what's interesting, because this will be where I'll segue from a little bit of the analysis I've heard, not just from you guys, but in general from people on the internet, is people are so focused on like, oh, what a failure Split 1 was. They went back to relegation. They didn't seem to have any shining lights, etc. And if you really look at Split 1 and break down what it was 4 rookies. Three rookies and one half split guy in Nisbeth and one full split guy. Our veteran was trashing full split. Okay.
Yeah.
So we had a total of a split and a half between all 5 guys. Went into this thing without a veteran leader like you would normally have in that circumstance. A lot of times you'd be like, hey, rookie, you're alongside Froggen or somebody who's been doing this forever, right? And they were getting their footing. And so a lot of things very early on, what I love about Jacob YamatoCannon is that he didn't go in going, look guys, you're all mechanically gifted, we all get that. Let's forget that. Let's break down the game and build up how you play the game from scratch in a lot of ways. It takes a lot of time, right? So imagine you go play for Phil Jackson in basketball. He does the famous triangle basketball. That is incredibly difficult concept, and you might be a sick basketball player, but you have to break down what you do to learn how to play the game basketball almost all over again to start playing in the triangle. Some people can't, by the way. Some people cannot play the triangle. They suck at it, right?
Correct.
And in the same way, like YamatoCannon, what I love about him as a coach is he has his own style and his own philosophy, which what coaches are supposed to have. We've got this idea in the past that coaches are pick ban specialists, which is really silly because the players can pick ban if we give them enough information. What the hell they need a coach to do that for, right? What they need is a leader and someone to really shape the vision of the team and make some cohesion and all that kind of stuff. But that first split, if you watched week over week, it was small improvements. So we talk about SMART goals, but it's short-term achievable goals, right? Get a little better each week. And yeah, there's always going to be anomalies of ups and downs, but it really culminated in things like when we almost perfect gamed Fnatic, and I think it was week 7, followed by week 8 or week 9. People remember that we lost to G2, but if you watch that game, we were ahead for a good chunk of that game in a game we arguably should have gotten stomped according to what everyone thought, right? Because G2 was so far ahead of everyone that split. And when we came out of that split going is, wow, from where we were in week 1 to week 9, it was incredibly different. It was that little progress, and that was all we expected. And I remember having a conversation with Jacob in between splits saying, what do you think? Do you think we need to make some big changes or whatever? And he's, at the time, a 20-year-old, he's 21 now, year old kid, he said to me, very maturely said, remember what we said, right? We're going to take this year as our, we're pacing it. That we got everything we wanted out of the first split. I said, you're absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So what do you want to do? So of course we did make a change. We made the change in support, but it wasn't that we were like, we must make a change. That makes sense, right? Like we were out going, looking for it, but it was an opportunity, I guess is the way to look at it. But that's because it was a more slow measured approach. And then so I'm going to jump ahead, even though we didn't quite get to it, of why are we with the same roster again this year, right? Well, number one, we have 3 18-year-old kids. 18.
Correct. Yeah.
If anybody thinks they've reached the capacity of what they're capable of doing, well, then they don't belong talking about League of Legends competitively, right? So at least 3 out of my 5 players somewhere between here and here we haven't touched yet, whatever their specific ceilings are. The other two haven't played competitively for that long. So no matter their age, it's not like they've been playing competitive for 8 years or something like that and they've capped out. I mean, we're talking about guys like Amazing and Ceades having resurgences, and how long have those guys been playing for, right? And so clearly, again, all 5 players have room. So if we look at the entirety of the year, we got all those growth steps out of the way. People like Mickey got their opportunity to play on the craziest, biggest stage 3 months into his professional career. And that's a big step, right? That's hot. He got to have his nerves and get out of the way and be like, whoa, what was that craziness? And now that's done, and go back and grow from that. So I'm gonna make this last point then and kind of throw it back to you guys.
Yeah, of course.
This is something specific in your podcast that I've heard other people kind of comment in similar directions. They talk about Kabe and how he was lower in the first split and much more dynamic in the second split, and then maybe somewhere different in Worlds. And something I want to point to, it was, you said, I remember which one of you, but I'll poorly quote you. Something about, there's going to be a mean to come back to. Are we going to see it closer to what we saw in the second split, or closer to first split, or da-da-da? I would argue that neither of those things are true, because the third thing is Kabe is 1 year into his career. And so the progression doesn't end because he had a dynamic second split. I think the progression continues. Am I 100% sure of that? Of course not. That's sports, right? Like, if I were sure of that, I'd be a gajillionaire right now, and I'd be working consulting for a lot of sports teams, right? But the reason I believe in him is, like, maybe he had, I'm not a statistical guy in League of Legends, because that's not, I'm just not. And I leave it to folks like you to tell me. I understand, I guess his stats weren't as good maybe at Worlds or something, so there are always going to be these ups and downs, right?
Correct.
Generally, the curve is going up. So my expectation of someone like Kabe is not that he'll settle in somewhere in here where he's been, but I think he can go up here. I think he can go up here. And I truly believe that. So you don't have to agree with me, right? Like, that's the great thing about sports. We don't have to agree. But that's kind of my thought process.
So you basically, you bring up, you have like 3 major points in this, so I'll hit on one, Chase will hit on one.
I know, I talked forever.
Hey!
We appreciate it. That's
we'll
the
take
rate we
it.
were hoping for when you came on the show. So,
like I said, we can do this for 10 hours in the pre-show. Like, I'm totally okay with that.
I know, people always joke, like, how come we don't have 3.5-hour epic podcasts anymore, right? My wife will kill me if it's 3.5 hours, but...
But the first point is something you bring up about analysis, and I think part of the reason why I will say myself in particular was so critical of Splyce in the spring split is because we had this expectation that was created based off of the performance of Dignitas EU in the Challenger Series. They were the big guns. They swept through everything. They were a dominant team, and we had this expectation. And I think I remember when we did a preview episode talking about Senkux and being like, this guy and G2 Perks have a chance to be part of this next echelon of great European mid laners. And
do you know what's really interesting about you saying that, though? If you think about it, you put Perks in a very different system, though. So you put Senkux in a team where it's like, hey, here's a whole bunch of other rookies. And you're all going to have to figure out. It goes back to what I mentioned about rookies and pros. Senkux kind of, hey, you're still going to be the leader. You're still going to be the star. But everyone can focus on you, right? Like, Perks got to thrive with a guy like Trick next to him, for example. Like, it's very different circumstances.
And that's actually exactly what I'm going into, is that when we compared them, justifiably or not, we were comparing G2 and Splyce the entire way. And I think that's a great point that you bring up, is that we look at that and we go, well, yeah, they're both Challenger Series team, but Emperor and Trick had both had experience in other regions. Trick had played, a few games in Korea. Kikis was the top laner at the time for G2. He had experience, although it was in the jungle position. So I think
Kikis is a solid player for European LCS.
Absolutely. So I do think you're actually correct in being somewhat critical of people going, oh, well, Splyce was relegated and G2 won the entire split. And I think you're correct that we sort of did compare apples to oranges in that case, where we aren't taking into account some of the tiny little things. Like you said, you have 3 players that were absolutely rookies, that 18 years old. And I think
17 for most of the year.
17. 17. And I'm going to throw this to Chase, because your second point is talking about YamatoCannon. And Chase has a little bit more experience dealing with YamatoCannon as a fan than I do. So Chase, why don't you bring up your thoughts on YamatoCannon?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, first of all, I'll take credit and blame for the copy point. That was me on the podcast, and it comes down to I think you made a very good point about narrative.
Hey, you're welcome.
No, look, it's one of those things where I still have my qualms about him. You know, we'll do our final predictions, I think, in a future episode. But you know, I have worries. I'm more confident than I am in, you know, some other things. But I think that it's very interesting how you point out that there's this whole other narrative going on that sometimes gets ignored because of the way that we do our week by week instant response to whatever games that we just saw. Yep. You don't necessarily see the patterns unfolding to you until you tend to take a step back. And that was something when I did my final rankings, I very much had to take that step back and see, like, well, they are only 18 and they do have this curve here. And, you know, if you're going to gamble wrong, you know, gamble on the upside, you know, take the risk that these guys who can still improve are going to get there.
We love to do in sports all the time is go, hey, this coach who's failed 4 times at 4 NFL teams, let's give him a 5th shot, right? Like,
yeah.
Or George Karl.
Coach that might blow all our expectations. It always killed me when sports does that, you know?
Yeah, always fun to fail upwards, as Jeff Fisher would tell you for a while now. But
they get jobs over and over again as they continue to fail and get fired, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk to you about YamatoCannon because not only did I have him as I'm a Rocket fan. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay.
Love you guys at Splyce, but that's my hardcore team since season 3. Shout out to Fly if you're watching this. I have seen YamatoCannon coach my team. He did not have a very successful stint over at Rocket, I would say. There were some very clear problems when the playoffs rolled around. He's obviously grown very much as a coach, and as someone who has been a coach, I'm curious when you talk about the system that he's put in place and this kind of plan that you've had, what is it specifically that Jacob brings to that, other than the fabulous, you know, Tomato Canyon memes and everything else? What is it that allows him to be the leader that you've wanted him to be?
So let's all say we all love the fact that he is the celebrity that he is, right? Like, no one's going to take that away from it. It's fantastic to have a face to your team, like Bjergsen gets to be for TSM. I mean, I do love that. So we'll get that out of the way. Jacob brings a patience and a measured approach to dealing with very young guys, you know. Mickey is kind of silly, and Kabe's kind of reserved, and Trashy loves to make jokes, and everyone has their personalities, right? And, you know, this is always the difference between Challenger and LCS in general, is having a legitimate system around people changes the way you practice, let's say, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So even simple things like going, you don't even get to bring your cell phone in the room. When you sit down, if I catch you on social media, you're in trouble, right? Because there's that level of respect, and not even in trouble like I'm going to punish you, but you think of it when your father is disappointed in you, right? Like, there's almost that level of relationship, which is spectacular to watch. Even very, very, very early on. So I visited the LCS week 1 last year for the owners conference and to see week 1, and it was the first time I'd gotten to get with everybody. Okay, so I'd met some of the guys in Copenhagen before that, but I hadn't gotten with everybody. And I watched a moment where I can't remember exactly what was said. It was between scrims or something like that. And Senkuk said one thing, and Jacob just grabbed him for a second and talked to him for like 12 seconds. And he looked at him and looked in the eye. You could see Senkuk took it in, nodded his head, and went on, right? The lesson was said, it was taken, and it was moved on. And so he's only working with Yamato at that point for 3 weeks. And the respect level was already astronomically high, to where if I said the same thing to him in that time period where I just got to know him, it would have been in 1 year after the other, not because of who he is, but because he's a 17-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And I was the same way at 17 years old. But, like, I saw him look him in the eye, respect everything he was saying, and go, I understand why you're talking to me right now, why I need to pay attention. Some of those are purely intangible. Some of that's personality, right? Like, we don't all get to have that. I'm a fast-talking, energetic, crazy energy type person. That's just me, right? Like, I will never be slow-talking, measured, precise Yamato. We are actually very different in that way. Philosophically, we are so in line. That's why we love working together, and that's why we've now done this for 2 seasons in a row together. He certainly gets other suitors, both last season and this season, you know. But the other thing I think that's really important about why he's successful is Jacob doesn't sit down and go, okay, guys, do some scrims. At the end, I'm going to give you some notes. Wonder at that one point you shouldn't have tower dove, and Senkuk's at one point I want you to be more aggressive. That's not what it's about, right? They're looking at the entirety of macro play, right? They're looking at the entirety of how the game of League of Legends is played. And I don't know a lot of coaches are doing that right now, you know? If you look at, we'll go back to the Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson doesn't go, hey, well, I'll say Derrick Rose is not there anymore, but Derrick Rose, you should have passed the ball here. Yes, he does that too, but he also goes, here's how the game of basketball in Chicago is played. And that's the difference is we have Splyce League of Legends, right? We have a way the game is played as an organization. And it reminds me a bit of if you look at certain single player games, that you'll see that more often because it relies on one player, right? So Smash is famous for this. People have more aggressive, less aggressive styles. You see it in Street Fighter, StarCraft. Absolutely, you'll see this in people who like to play all-ins versus very conservative. So you don't get that, I think, as often in team games because you change one player and the whole dynamic can change if it's just player based. Right. So I think, at the very rudimentary level, he's bringing structure, he's bringing his own style to it, and he's bringing a stability that even when you do say something like, okay, Nisbeth out, Mickey X in, right? It didn't change the identity of the team at all because now Mickey X is learning a system and a style. And I can compare that to our Counter-Strike team, for example, where we don't have a coach, where it's really challenging when we get new players. Okay, so we just got 2 brand new players in Rix and Drone, right? Wonderful players. They fit right in. And chemistry-wise, the guys are having some of the most fun they've ever had playing Counter-Strike because they finally have 5 guys. They really fit well. Everyone fits their role. However, getting to the point where they were as 5-8 months ago, it takes a lot of time, right? Because you don't have that one stylistic component because their style is going to be different now, right, with these new players. Right. So that's kind of the very basic level. It doesn't get to some of your points, which I know you want to talk about, like what are the next levels and what are his capabilities. But I think at the rudimentary level, that's kind of the important way to look at it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you hit on a lot of points that, we don't see enough in conversations when we talk about teams in general. When we talk about teams having infrastructure and having a system that you could trust, it's not about, who has the biggest sponsors, who has the most players on Reddit. It's about who has a coach who understands a system, has a specific outline for how he wants the game to be played, and can impart that on players in a way where they want to buy in. I mean, that's the number one thing that if you're going to have, you could have the best coach in the world. If you don't buy in, it's pointless. And you can have
coaches walk off stage and will go, guys, that was on me. My pick ban was poor there, right? How many coaches will do that? And Yamato will absolutely do that. That to me is like NBA or NFL level, right? Like a coach will walk off the field and go, I called the wrong plays or I put the wrong guy in, right? Yeah. That's a very different thing than our pick ban specialists as we talk about, right? And is Yamato perfect? Of course not. He'll be the first one to tell you he's not perfect. None of us are, right? He's 21 years old, but he's got all the tools, and that's what I love about him. So
exactly. And those tools, they take time to, he has to sort it out, watch, see the players grow and then adapt to their changing skill sets and everything. It explains a lot of why it would take a split to figure all that out and why the second split, if you're one of those people who believes that Splyce is going to be able to recreate that, it's going to be because those factors are still very much in place. And that's kind of this end of the spectrum that I lean on at the end of the day.
Well, what's really interesting too is I'm just going to throw, like you mentioned about seeing the growth in the split. One of the points people talked about is how poorly we did in the Unicorns of Love series, right? And how we expected to sweep through that. But everyone forgets that we switched to standard lanes, right? Yes. And we were playing an entirely different game all of a sudden. And what was really interesting is people will say, well, does that mean that Splyce can't play standard lanes? And I would say, absolutely not. It just means that we were so built and structured because we are a structured team and we don't do what I'll call the this is me not quashing on their approach. It's just a different approach, the Immortals approach, where they get 5 really talented people, put them together, right? They're not putting people into a system. At least I don't think so. It's not outwardly what it looks like. It looks like they're going to get the 5 best talents and putting it together, right? And then theoretically, 1 or 2 of just the skills of the players will just figure out the new meta. When you've actually built the game of League of Legends at Splyce a certain way, that itself has to adapt to the new meta is the way I kind of think of it, if that makes sense.
You're basically discussing, for people who pay attention to basketball, the Pat Riley versus Greg Popovich approach, where Riley is, I'll go get the talented guys, talent works, they'll make it, they'll make it fit.
If the coach doesn't get in the way.
If the coach doesn't get in the way, talent will figure it out, and that was successful for Miami at bringing in LeBron and Bosh to pair with Wade. They ended up figuring that out, and that was probably more because LeBron James is a once-in-a-generation talent that is willing to take a back seat at moments.
What people don't mostly know is that because Dwayne Wade was willing to take a step back, and that is very, very rare for a player. He's a top 10 player of all time, maybe at the end of his career, and it's rare for that to happen,
And then Popovich, or you being an upstate New York boy, Jim Boeheim. It's a system. I pick players that come and fit into the system. So I think that's very apropos. And we normally attribute the system to Fnatic. We talk quite a bit about the Fnatic system, but I think we almost do that more as a culture as opposed to like the nitty gritty. This is how Fnatic League of Legends is played. There have been moments where there's the tried and true XPEC ASOS sit in a bush, the Fnatic Death Bush, that gets brought up every once in a while. But I haven't thought about Splyce having this sort of very rigid playbook type system in my analysis. So
I think we're a split away. You got to have two successful splits before we say this is clearly a system where we can point to and say you're going to have continued success.
Well, no,
which is a challenge for you guys. We want to see you guys rise up to that. That would be awesome.
I don't agree with you. I don't disagree at all, right? Like, it's not if you have success for a single season in any sport, you're forgotten about years down the road, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just a fact. It's the continued success makes people look back at like, hey, we're in Western New York. How about the Buffalo Bills, right? Like there was a period of time where they were very successful. People make jokes in the championship, but they were one of the most successful teams of all time in the entire sport, right? I'm not a Bills fan, so I'm certainly not trying to pat their back.
It's okay. You're killing me here. Don't worry about it.
He's dying slowly on the inside. I appreciate this. Please continue.
But my point being that there's a reason that they're talked about and important to the history of the sport in the same way the Dallas Cowboys are, in the same way the 49ers are. We'll talk about the same generation, right? And the reason no one cares the Redskins won one Super Bowl, or did they win? I forget. They were really good for one season as a point, right? Like nobody cares except Redskins fans.
I don't think they won that one.
I
think
won
that was
one.
But you get my point. Like it's not important unless you have some measure of sustained success, like over a period of time. Which is why when people ask me, and in fact, what is my philosophy? I'd rather win 3 championships in 10 years than one right now. Anytime.
I think that's very fair. And I think so far, the last few minutes we've really been focused on things that other people might risk, right? Like the system you guys have tried to put in place, the growth and the way we would expect young players to kind of curve upwards. Those are factors that, both analysts and fans alike don't always get right or don't always take into account when they make their
It might be right for all I know, right? Like someone might be terrible when we come back for all I know, right? So
yeah, but I'm just curious, like you've seen all these articles come out, you've watched our podcast, I'm sure you've read all the other the big analysts who make their predictions, that it's kind of hard not to see these things when you're running a team, obviously.
We all read a lot more than we let on, let's put it that way. So
I think that is always the case. And I'm curious if there's one thing you've noticed when you're looking at whether it's particularly for this split or just over the year and a half now that's, year or so, I guess I should say, that Splyce has been in the EULCS. If there are any other traps that you see people commonly falling into, either over-evaluating or overestimating the value of one particular trait, or maybe underestimating something that you wish people talked about more often.
I'd say a couple things. The first is panic roster changes. I was a fan for a couple of years before he did this, so I've watched it happen. Not just the crazy amount of roster changes we had between splits. For us, we were building a roster for the first time, so it wasn't surprising that after a split, just finally seeing our players play, we made a roster change. But you saw some pretty significant roster changes across the entire ecosystem, North America and Europe, right? And I think that part of this is relegation. That's unfortunate, right? Like relegation scares people, and so you are almost. I think it was Reggie said this once. He's like, "Look, like we'd love to let talent develop, but if relegation starts getting a real thing, we get scared, and we don't want to lose our slot, and we have to make reactions. That sucks." And I agree, right? The last thing I want to let's take Mickey as an example. Let's say Mickey did come in. Let's say he had a shaky split instead of the amazing split he had, where he legitimately could have been rookie of the split, right?
Right.
And I've been going, geez, can we even afford another split with this guy? Maybe halfway through the split we get rid of him in a normal kind of circumstance, right? Fortunately, we weren't anywhere near relegation, and even if that was shaky, we could say we still think he's the guy of the future, and that's what matters, right? And I think if you look at traditional sports, I mean, God, how many players are terrible for the first couple of years into the pros, but you can see all the makings of a great pro. Kabe, for example, one of the ways I think people miss. His first split wasn't great, people say, right? his work ethic is almost unparalleled. The guy is and his mechanical skills is there because of that. Because mechanical skill, a lot of times, is about refining it, right? Like just beating it to death almost. That's what makes Bjergsen so great. Like people will say he puts in more time than almost anybody, right? Another great Dane. But it took a while for it to translate. Whether it was nerves, I don't know. Whether it was him just figuring out how to do it on stage, who knows, right? Imagine I wasn't willing to do that and said, you know what, I'm just going to go out. I need to get another 80 carry. There was a bunch of these experienced ones at the time who were unemployed, but arguably not as good. Copy made it to Worlds, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I'd say, the first one for sure. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but it's tough. I wish people had time to wait for talent more. The second thing I think is, this is philosophical again, is the focus on an individual talent. And like, it's a team game, you know? In Call of Duty, you can do that, right? Like you pick up, when we picked up Jerd in Call of Duty, like people are like, damn, they just got Jerd. Like, who's beating this team now? They already advanced, already Josh, now they got Jerd, right? Killer. And then Mad Cat on top of it. It's a sick team. No one in Europe will argue that, right? In League of Legends, you pick a player and people try to make the same corollary. Oh my God, Double Lift went to TSM. They're unstoppable now. He's the best AD carry in North America. And a lot of those things are true. Like he is an incredible AD carry and stuff like that. Because it's a very team-oriented game where your team dynamics matter so much. You don't make heroic plays. Like Bance literally won us part of the world championship in Call of Duty by himself. He won v3, right? Like that is so much rarer in League of Legends for that to happen, right? It's much more often that one person throws the game for you than wins it for you in League of Legends.
Yes.
Everyone remembers Double Lift stepping into the victor. Everyone remembers that.
Oh my God. There was a point where I mean, people don't remember that we lost to TSM twice, but we almost obliterated them both games. You know, like we obliterated Double Lift at one point. Like,
why don't you have QSS Double Lift? Why don't you have QSS?
There was a point where under tower, he just got exploded, right? So, like, even the best players that happens to. But so that's not really my point, but it's a fun thing to bring up. My point, though, to get back to is, just by going, oh, I just went and got the best Korean XYZ, or we just brought over this Danish whatever, that is a piece of the puzzle, right? But there's so many dynamics to look at that go, how does this person fit in the personality of the team? How does their role fit in? In League of Legends, we have the luxury of positions. You don't have that luxury as much in a game like CSGO where, they play positions, but they shift sometimes, right? Like, all of a sudden it's like, does he fit here? And is it different because Chase plays first in different than I used to? So now maybe he can't do the same. You know what I mean? Like, it's just different. So I think those two things to me are probably two of the, on the playing field anyway, the two biggest things I see as I'll say this right, a very untalented person in League of Legends. I have no idea what I'm talking about, to be completely honest. I'm talking to you from a purely philosophical standpoint. I actually suck at the game, so.
I think most of us actually do, and if we didn't, we'd probably be on the LCS stage.
Oh no, when I say I suck, I mean I have yet to get. I have done 3 placement games ever. I haven't even played ranked, so.
That's fine. My players told me that I actually made it worse for them to get scrims when I played ranked, because my rank is so bad that other teams would look at it and say, who's this joker? We don't want to scrim with his team. So I guess you got that going for you. Your players are probably grateful.
I'm pretty good at Hearthstone. I'll take that one. So
yeah, there you go.
I'll bring up another philosophical discussion. So sure. I would like you to travel back in time, and I want you to be going back to your AMA that you did in 2015.
A little Wayne's World thing.
Perfect.
I appreciate it.
Perfect. I want you to bring us back to 2015, 2016, Marty. And I want you to tell us what your goal for Splyce, for the League of Legends team, but if you want to do for the entire organization, I'm okay with that. For what would 2015/16 Marty's goal for 2017 be versus what is today's Marty's goal for 2017, and how much do they differ?
I'm going to caveat one thing. Let's forget that for a little while, Marty was a tech company head and cared differently, right? Like
Absolutely.
I openly admit it was a marketing effort. We got teams because we didn't realize what we were doing before we became a pro team, right? And then that website's closed down, et cetera, and that's not our focus, okay? So as a pro team head, though, my goal for 2017 would be to be a dominant force in League of Legends. So year one is about establishing, right? We lived in the Copenhagen Wolves team house. Like we didn't even have time to get our own team house, right? We just got someone else's. This year we have an incredibly awesome team house that the guys are like, I'm pretty sure ecstatic about. It's like triple the size of the other one, right?
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. I can't wait to do a house tour for it. Everyone's got their own rooms, for example, which people need. They need privacy, right? So very basic things that you couldn't do in year one because you need to throw the team, you need to get out there, get contract signed, and play the game, right? But in comparison, I think expectations now aren't just about being a dominant in the game. It's about more broadly being a fan favorite. Right. I think that looking at 2016, one of the things that we didn't do effectively enough is build our LCS brand and build our each player's brand. Right. So some of it is due to having a poor first split. Right. Like winning does help a lot. Correct. I'm sure, but I want to be able to see the shining star of some of our players like grow these great social media followings and do stories about them and really grow that, but also grow like this Splyce fan base. I'm gonna talk about one of my favorite fan bases out there, the Unicorns Love, man. Like it is so cool to sit in LCS and see their fans there. They're dedicated, they're hardcore, and I love that. I want to see that, and we can do a lot more for that. We're very fortunate to have Hans, our manager of the League of Legends team, come back this year. He's now director of all of our European operations for Splyce. And he has a lot of great ideas and great talent for doing that kind of stuff, and is already working on some things. Because I think if you're a rookie at what I do, not in the game, you go, let's win games, right? Very basic. If you get more advanced, you go, that's a small piece of the puzzle. I'm an entertainment industry veteran for like 15, 16 years now. This is entertainment. We're entertaining for that, 2 hours a week on the Rift? What about the rest of the week, right? What about all the rest of the year in general? And we got better at that as the year went on, but there's so much more we can do there so that fans are entertained and enjoy and love the brand 365 days a year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the Unicorns of Love, I mean, when you have the pink unicorn hats you could put on at any moment, maybe you guys need
charge with this big, beautiful chest out there.
Oh,
yeah,
I loved it.
Where's your guy with the chest and like the rattlesnake going across?
Where's your Jake the Snake Roberts? That's who you need. You need Jake the Snake Roberts to go out there for you guys.
I do. That's a fair point.
Well,
the snake thing, it's funny because I don't know how that manifests. It's like so many sports mascots. Do you really have somebody in a snake costume? I'm no different. The Spurs don't have a spur out there, right? Like, that'd be ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I'll leave that marketing side of things up to you.
Yeah, I don't decide those.
Yeah, fair enough. I wanted a couple quick hits real quick before we round this out. Favorite behind the scenes story, whether it's like a particularly funny player or just a moment that you would not have had if it hadn't been for owning this LCS team. Stands out.
I'll tell you a touching one, I guess.
Okay.
When we were at the European Championship in Poland, and we finished our games, and we came backstage, and Jacob spoke to the players, and he's just such a powerful leader. Like I said, you don't get to see it all the time, but he's a powerful leader, and the things he said, he stood there stoic in front of these just downtrodden 5 young men who just they knew they could win, right? Mm-hmm. And they made some mistakes and some things that they got maybe on a plate or whatever, but they have the talent to win. It's not like they were outclassed or anything like that, and they didn't, right? And he ended his speech, and you felt like there was another day and there was more to this journey, as he even put it, right? And then afterwards I got to say a few words to the guys and remind them how just because I'm not there every day this is all a big part of what is so important to the Splyce family. We use the word family a lot. I know it's so cliche, but there are staff members you never see or talk to all the time that can't wait for our games to come on in all of our different disciplines and crowd around the TV and shout and scream and stuff like that. But they're not on social media and stuff, so you don't hear about them, right? Mm-hmm. So that was an incredible moment to kind of see that all come together. On the fun side, I just love watching the rapport of many of our players, not even just LCS, right? Watching my COD guys pull each other's chain, watching the jokes the Counter-Strike guys will play on each other when we're at an event, being in the car with MacD driving to and from BlizzCon together, I've developed such a relationship with my players over the years that they really are like my friends in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of cool moments like that it's hard to pick more than one, but I can tell you there have been a lot of jokes over the years that probably shouldn't get out in the public.
Fair dues. Well, wait the tell-all book when you're done.
That's what shows like ours are for,
book, right? Like I don't know if you heard the George Carl book.
I read it.
Did everybody? So.
Oh my God!
I actually got it, and I read it purely because
I heard he destroys everybody though.
He does, and he does. At some point, Bill Simmons brought this up on a podcast, and he's absolutely right. It feels like a chunk of the book is missing, because there's nothing about the Kings and Boogie Cousins.
I heard that, yeah.
There's
I listened
nothing.
to Bill Simmons' podcast talking about it, not to get too far off tangent, but he says it's definitely, they just said, you can't talk about that, it's under NDA or something,
Yeah.
So.
But I do think that you guys, just this past week, you've started this Who is Splyce series on Twitter, and Mac D's been your first guy, and I think...
you actually caught second week. I was the first guy.
Okay. I must have missed that last week then.
I kind of grew up in this generation of it. If you want someone to do something, the boss has to be willing to do it too. So I said, why don't I go first? So I did the first week, and Mac D did the second week. I honestly was running on the treadmill finally, because it's almost impossible to find time, and I thought of that. So I'm glad to hear somebody reads it.
Yeah, it's just been one of these things. Like, I feel like that's something that's important, and it's nice. I think I remember when I first saw it, you guys said it wasn't just going to be players; it was going to be some behind the scenes staff. Obviously, you as one of the co-owners started it, so I think that's something all esports departments need to do, all esports teams need to do, because as much I'm a huge TSM fan, as much as I love Bjergsen, pretty much know almost everything about Bjergsen by now. Like, I want to hear some more about, like, Biofrost, or on your team. Yeah. I'd love to hear some more about Mickey, and, like, how you guys came up, how you picked him as a player.
He's a funny guy, let me tell you. You don't get to see it. He's a funny guy.
So, but the Bill Simmons, I'm glad we went on that little tangent, because something that he's brought up and something Chase and I have brought up before is the idea of a sports widow.
Sports what?
A sports widow is when, like, you were dedicated to a certain team. He brings it up mainly...
The Chargers after yesterday.
Yeah, the Chargers after yesterday.
Or like Seattle Supersonics fans.
When the Supersonics left, when the Atlanta Thrashers left.
Or Bryce Blum. He's still sitting there. If you've seen this, Bryce, I'm sorry, buddy. I'm shedding a tear for you, pal. So.
But we've built on this. Chase has unfortunately been an esports widow more times than I have, but I am currently one in Europe because I was a long-time Moscow 5 Gambit guy. Okay. And no team has truly stolen my heart for me to want to root with them with a fervor. So Unicorns of Love have given me a pretty solid pitch the last 3 months or so. I want to give you, being the hometown guy, I want to give you just a couple minutes. Why should I be a Splyce fan?
Well, I want to talk about Unicorns of Love before I say that, because I think part of what's incredible about them is they're very clear. They understand who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't pretend to be something they're not, and they're proud of what they've built, and I think that shows, and that's part of why they're able to build this great fan base. On the other side, I would say for Splyce, I think that I should never matter in why you're a fan of Splyce. It should be reflected in what the great players that pick and the staff that put out the great content and all that kind of stuff. So if our social media and our YouTube channel and our play on different stages of depending on what game it is, if the demeanor of our players when you see them, if our merchandise, the quality of those things aren't enough to make you a fan, then I failed anyway, right? So if I look at what makes people love a sports team, forget the home affiliation, because we're not quite there yet in esports, though I absolutely believe we will be. But the other things are great players, great organization, great messaging, colors, just all those things that go with being a fan. And it's my job, as I guess in the leadership role, being the CEO, I don't do a lot of those things. I have awesome people that do it for me, whether it's our art department, video, you name it, but making sure that they have the right guidance so that it all comes together as a cohesive thing, so that you go, I can see what it is to be a Splyce fan. I want to be part of that, right? It's almost like, it reminds me of joining the Boy Scouts when I was a kid, right? When you join the Boy Scouts, you're like, you see it and you're like, that looks awesome. I want to do that, right? Like, I want to go camping every month. I want to, like, feel proud of myself when I accomplish those things, etc. And it's very clear because they've created this thing that it's very clear what it is, right? The Boy Scouts doesn't have to sell itself on you, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a long-winded answer to actually say nothing. That's what I literally just. But I truly believe that, right? Like, at the end of the day, it should be everything the work we do should be the thing that's our sales tool.
I
do
like
you
that
guys
answer.
listen to Thorin at all, by the way?
Yes.
So
I'm
did
quite
you
a
hear
big
his
fan.
podcast on advertising esports recently?
I don't think I've heard that one yet. No.
I highly recommend it to everybody because I think he said something that, and he usually is he's a very eloquent guy. He said
Yes.
I couldn't, and what he said is, I think some people who make products don't always get this. Make a great product, and then get exposure for the product tied to the right thing. Don't get people try to convince to try to buy the product. It isn't TSM's job to say, hey guys, buy Geico. It's Geico's job to make a great product, and TSM's job to be tied to it and cool and show how awesome it is that Geico's out there. It's exposure, right? It's the same exact thing as a product. Splyce is a product, right? I need to make a great product. It's going to sell itself then.
Yeah.
I really like that answer. I'll be honest. I like that answer. That's a good sales pitch.
Appreciate it.
Sales pitch.
It's very fair. And now, obviously, there are plenty of people who have bought in. We're going to have you back because you just made that point about regionalization of esports and getting a hometown thing.
Yeah.
I could pick your brain on that for a couple hours on itself.
Well, how about we wait till we get closer to Overwatch and we'll talk about it related to the big one that's coming, right? So
that sounds.
Are we going to get a Rochester, New York Overwatch team? Is that what you're telling me, Marty?
Whoa. Let's not go crazier. I will tell you, I know nothing about Overwatch that you don't know. This is not me lying to you. I don't have a reason to.
Good, because we don't know anything either.
Yeah,
no,
perfect.
We know. You read that video you saw? I saw it too. So I saw it in a cool room with really nice curtains and a lot of famous people, but it was the same video. So
yeah, no, I think that's fair, and we would love when that picks up and we know some more details about that. That would be awesome. But for now, I want to close with the same thing we ask everyone, team-oriented to close with. Is there anything you want to say to your fans, people who have loved your team, who've poured themselves into what you're building, can you just want to talk to them, what that means to you, et cetera?
So I have to. There's always those cliche things like we have the greatest fans in the world and stuff like that people say, right? What I kind of pinpoint back to is a lesson I learned from the tech community, which is that in the beginning, when you're building any product, your job is to go and try and get customers one by one, and touch them in a way that makes them a customer. And so still to this day, I try to live to that philosophy. So whether it's on social media, responding to absolutely everyone I can, whether it's talking to anybody that wants to talk to me at an event, whether it's replying to as many of these emails about questions about can I get advice or whatever, because people gave me that when I didn't know what I was doing in esports. So I hope that has resonated with the fans out there, and I will say that on the other side, I see the passion you bring, and the every time I get to meet somebody or see somebody with they have a Splyce banner in their Twitter or their name is Splyce something, and I'm like, oh my god, this person changed their Twitter name to Splyce something. That is so freaking cool. Or the kid who ran over to us at the major when we were in March of last year, barely when I knew us, we thought at that point, he was like, oh my god, you guys are from Splyce. He's like breathing heavy. He's with his mom, and I almost like burst in tears. I'm like, oh my god, he knows who we are, I think that Crepo says this a lot. Like, don't be afraid to walk up to people because it means more to us than you'll ever imagine. I don't care about awards. I don't care about any of that kind of credit. The second a 10-year-old fan walks over me and tells me how much he loves the team, you just made my year. Like, it means more than anything else in esports. I've been in entertainment for 15 plus years. Like, you do entertainment because you want people to love your work. You don't do it because you want to get credit, so.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think that's something, Walter, I mean, every little positive comment we see on YouTube or anyone we've met, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The negative will always be there because of the nature of the internet. When you can find a way to focus on the positives, it really does, it does matter. And I think that's awesome.
And they grow too, right? Like over time, you get more and more of them. If you engage them, make them feel like their voice does matter. And it's exciting to see that as the conversation grows,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And in fact, that's how this happened. It was someone reaching out to us, and he just so happened to be the owner of a European LCS team. So like Chase said earlier, Marty, thank you so much for coming on. We definitely, I think we're definitely going to have you back on at some point. You don't know it yet. But you're going to be on another episode.
You'll have to check my assistant and schedule my people, get with your people. And
Absolutely. It's all emails. It's all Rolodexes, all that jazz. But you've definitely been added to the rough drafts a Rolodex.
Friends of the podcast.
Yeah, you're an official friend of the
like a
podcast.
smoking jacket or something for that.
Yeah, your badge is coming in the mail. Just wait a little bit. It'll be
right after ours. Don't right after we get ours.
Become a thing in gaming. The thumbs up. Have you noticed like we brought this back from like 1982? People take a picture and they do this in the picture, and it's like, what? When did this become a thing again? So now here I go. I'm giving you a thumbs up.
Officially endorsed by the Rough Drafts
Podcast. Right? I think it's because it's the biggest emote everyone uses all the time. Thumbs up, thumbs up. So now we do it in real life again too, as if it's 1982 or something.
I don't actually think that's what the most popular emoji is, but that's not safe for work.
It's super positive, right?
We'll have to wait until 2017 when we see the Emoji Movie, which is coming out this year. Then we'll really know.
That's right.
But until then, I guess you'll have to deal with talking to us on social media networks. I'm at RedShirtKing. Walter, where can the nice people at home find you?
I am at Ceades_LOL. Marty, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm the LazerChicken guy with a bunch of Z's at the end. LazerChicken, Z, something like
3
that.
3 Z's.
I don't even know how many there are, so 3 is correct. I believe.
3 Z's. And
LazerChicken was taken, so I just added a bunch of Z's in the end. I'm not going to lie. It's not an exciting story.
That's the only reason I have _LOL at the end of my name, is there's some egg out there sitting on Ceades that hasn't tweeted since 2010. And
it's plain because the guy who owns LazerChicken is the real LazerChicken, as people will call him. He's the guy that actually won BlizzCon, for example, and is actually good at World of Warcraft. I just happen to have the same name as him, so.
I think he does. No offense, I think he probably deserves to have his own name a little bit more.
Yeah. If you win BlizzCon, I think you get to keep the Twitter name, right? So
yeah. Maybe you guys can have a fight at BlizzCon over it. Maybe you can do a wager. No, well,
there we go.
We'll see.
I'm a mediocre Warcraft player. He's a BlizzCon champion, the best Moonkin of all time. I bow at his feet. My Moonkin statue's not here. It's the office. I would have pulled it up and showed you how big a Moonkin fan I am. So.
Well, you'll have to show me in person. We'll grab a couple Jennies and a couple Zweigels, and you'll get to...
I know, not to say that about Jenny, but I don't know what that is.
I just have to say the local beer, because now we're at the end of the show. I have to get as much upstate New York stuff in at the end.
For sure.
But that is the end of the episode. Like I said, Marty, thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely have you on again in the future. And for the rest of you at home, if you like the podcast, you can follow us at Rough Drafts Pod on the Twitters. You can follow Splyce at Splyce on the Twitters as well. Marty is at LazerChicken with a bunch of Z's at the end. And
go to store.splyce.gg to get a sick hoodie. Not this old one. It's out of stock. We don't make it anymore, but the cool new ones.
Yeah. And come back tomorrow, because today is Monday, the day we release it. Tomorrow is our very first edition of the 2017 Spring Split Guess the Lines episodes. We'll be covering Europe and talking about Splyce tomorrow. So until then, goodbye, Internet. Hey there, Ceades here. Thanks for checking out the podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/roughdraftspod. For just $1 a month, you can join your fellow listeners in our patron-only Discord channel and help keep the content coming, or join our VIP club, where $1 a show or $8 a month gets you first priority on all patron content, like our patron-only Q&As. And check us out on all of our social media: Twitter @RoughDraftsPod, Facebook.com/RoughDraftsPod, SoundCloud.com/esportsroughdrafts, as well as on iTunes and YouTube by just searching for the Rough Drafts Podcast. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, Internet.